Good morning. Welcome to today's episode of The VUU. I'm Aisha Hauser and I'm in Seattle, Washington. And today we have a very important episode with Meg Riley and Christina Rivera. We are going to skip today's chit chat and go right in. And we're going to first hear a hello from our regulars. Michael?
Good morning, everyone. This is Michael Tino. I'm joining you here from Peekskill, New York.
And hi, everyone. This is Terri Burnor running Tech4U in St. Paul, Minnesota. As a reminder, I'll be live tweeting during the episode using the hashtag #TheVUU, VUU. So please follow along and join in as well.
Hi, I'm Christina Rivera, and I am joining you today as a guest.
And where are you, Christina, today?
I am located today. I'm in Charlottesville, Virginia.
And we are hoping that Kenny's sound will work. We were having some technical difficulties. Kenny, your sound is not working even with your headphone. Maybe try going out and coming back in one more time, maybe, or your phone. Okay, Kenny, we're going to try that out. So, Christina, we're going to talk about the UU white supremacy teach-in. One of the things I want to start with is the words white supremacy have clearly touched a nerve with many folks who are saying, hey, we're not the KKK, we're not Aryan Nation, why are you using these words? So I'd love to start there. I do want to say I had a really great conversation with a colleague, a religious educator, who said to me, well, the KKK, their mission is white supremacy, and that matches their values, so they're consistent in that way. Our mission of racial justice and social justice isn't matching how we're operating, because we are operating in a paradigm that values white over everyone else. So that was an interesting. I said, I guess the KKK is almost more consistent than we are. So feel free to speak to that.
So I think when we were naming even the teach-in, we knew we wanted to do a teach-in around white supremacy. And even as we were struggling with what we were going to call the teach-in, even those folks that were on the call, and it was a mix of religious educators of color and white religious educators and religious professionals, we too were struggling with, do we want to name this? And I think it comes from that thought of, like you said, of Aryan Nation or KKK being so tied into white supremacy. But really, when you're looking at white supremacy, when you're looking at the context in which we're using it in the US today, the default is white. The default for every standard that we have is white. And that in itself puts whiteness as the supreme standard to which everything else is measured against. And so really naming it as white supremacy, I think in a way is doing ourselves a favor, because I think it's destigmatizing it in a way that is making it accessible for a lot of folks who before just wouldn't even go there. Like, you can't even talk to me right now because you're saying white supremacy. I know I'm not a white supremacist. I know I'm not part of the Aryan Nation KKK. And now this is really giving us an opportunity to explore it in a way that I think is accessible for people.
So what would you describe as the genesis of this? Just for our viewers, who I'm going to go on a limb and say that most people who are watching and listening know that there's been controversy and turmoil over what has been named, and frankly, as fact, that our leadership at the Unitarian Universalist Association is predominantly white, and specifically in congregational life staff, leadership is exclusively white. And so naming that, it hit a chord, it struck a chord, right? And people started telling their stories and saying, hey, wait a minute, we didn't know, why is it this way? We're saying we're this. And then frankly, the response from the administration to me was puzzling at best, because instead of simply saying, hey, talk about how we got here, it was, oh, we don't really have enough applicants, which even saying that makes me cringe a little bit. But so I think it would, and so there was just social media flurry and emails and letters to the board. You are also a board member. You're also a board of trustees member of VUA, and so you know how many letters you've all been getting, right? And so I was really appreciative of the idea of the teach-in, because then, let's have a conversation throughout our and our goal was what, 150, and now we're up to
220 something at this point.
Yay.
Yeah.
So anyway, Michael, I'd love for you to jump in.
I absolutely will. So I think that part of what resonates for me in this, and that I'm trying to put words around, is the fact that calling it a white supremacy teach-in doesn't let those of us who are white, off the hook. It's not about those people, right? It's not about other people. It's really about the fact that we who are white are in part responsible for the continuation of a culture that values whiteness. And values, and I think we should be clear, a particular, even class-defined part of whiteness that's valued in Unitarian Universalist culture and in Unitarian Universalist leadership as well. One that I have access to, right? As an upper middle class educated white guy. So I know I know what that culture is. It's what I was brought up to value, even when it conflicted with my ethnic heritage. I was brought up to value that, and so I'm comfortable in an organization that values it. And being comfortable is not the point of religious transformation and religious community. So I have to be uncomfortable, right? I have to be uncomfortable for a little while in order to grow. And so I was really glad that you were clear about the words, the phrase white supremacy, even if it means that I have to then, as a white religious leader, deal with white fragility in people, because that's what it brings up. I noticed that Hank has just joined us.
Hi, gang. What's new?
Well, this show is not necessarily about what's new, but maybe about what's old.
Yeah, we're jumping right in, Hank. We're talking about the UU white supremacy teach-in, and Michael was reflecting on his point of view. So if you want to jump in there, and we were talking about the intentionally important words, white supremacy, and naming truth, speaking truth to power. So feel free to jump in.
Yeah, and I think first, yeah, thank you, and woo, I've missed a whole lot of stuff going on, and well, I've been off in Stowe as the sabbatical minister. So hi everybody. I think it's been very I think it's tough because I think so many people we spent these last few months protesting someone in the White House and I'm thinking of Steve Bannon, not even of the president, whom we think of as a white supremacist. And so then I think when people hear that term, they kind of go, oh, I'm not like Steve Bannon, or I'm not like those guys, and I'm not, I don't want people to start punching me or all those sort of things. And I think it's really a at the same time, I think there's something to be said about us getting the wind knocked out of us a bit. What I don't like to hear is people sort of saying oh, the wheels are coming off the cart, and I think there's sort of a cultural of events going on where everyone is sort of taking apart institutions, and institutions are falling apart, and there's a part of me that wants to make sure that people don't go like, well, that's it. I'm the UUA isn't perfect, and I'm gonna close up shop and stop going to any religious community. And like, that's not the point. I mean, the point is all of us sitting down and having some real honest talks about the things that are most important and hardest for us to talk about. We have such a culture of niceness. I think I've spoken about this before on the VUU. We have this culture of niceness where we don't want to say anything that might offend, and it's easy for us to sort of say those white supremacists over there, as opposed to saying like, oh, not only is there like a system that benefits people who are white, but also there's just that we do it without even thinking about it. And I have I've got to find those places in myself, and it's which is the hardest part. We're all for personal growth, and then you kind of go, oh, I thought personal growth would be easier. Ooh, so but yeah, no, it's a lot of emotion, and this has been some week, for a number of reasons, and once again, I think for us that we need to sort of there's always those times when I think people have gotten too far ahead of themselves. I got to go, let's come back. Let's think about cleaning up ourselves, our own house. And I think that's one of the things for that will be going on in congregations when they have these conversations. So
Kenny's sound is back.
Right.
Yay!
So y'all can hear me now? Oh, that's exciting. All right. So hey everyone. My name is Kenny, and I'm coming to you from Denver, Colorado. I'm sad I missed most of the first 12 minutes of the conversation, but it's great to be able to join it now. So so it sounds like we dove right in. So I'll just listen for a bit and try to catch up.
Well, I'd like, actually, Kenny, because the genesis of the teach-in, I remember your email going out to a group of us. So I would love to hear from you. What was the spark for you that this is what we should do, is have a nationwide call?
Well, I imagine it's been covered in some way already, but I think to me it was about this sort of, let's name a thing. And there is a lot of understandable anxiety about the phrase white supremacy. And from my perspective, if we can understand what we mean when we say that, then, I'm really glad that I know a lot of people are having conversations about the phrase. I'm really glad that, because if we in the letter that we sent out to participants yesterday, and I imagine you said there's about 240 now, which is wild. So what we said was that, Unitarian Universalists tend to think of ourselves as the solution people. We are going to go out there and we're going to, it's kind of like a pre-game sports pep talk. Like, we're going to go out there and we're going to fix stuff and fix the world and help the world and change the world. And I think what matters is that we recognize that sometimes, even though we may be trying to be part of the solution, we may also be part of the problem. And that may not be intentional. In fact, a lot of times in UU spaces, it's certainly not intentional. But once you're made aware of something, I think then there's a question of, are you going to be defensive about things, or are you going to say, okay, I've been made aware that this is a thing, so what can I do about it? So that's why I was one of the people who thought, let's have congregations and UU communities all over. Let's have folks really dive into. It's easy to point fingers at the UUA. The UUA is not doing enough, and UU World's not writing enough, and all this stuff, right? But I think it's more powerful if you say, okay, UUA, rough week. you know, maybe let's look at ourselves as part of the association. Let's look at ourselves and see, okay, got our own work to do as well. So that's sort of where I come from on this.
And if I can jump in there, I think that piece is really important, Kenny. That piece of, so the UUA is the Unitarian Universalist Association, and what a lot of people leave off is of congregations, right? And you could say communities. And so that part of the covenantal faith where we call each other into the work is, yes, the UUA, but it's of the congregations and communities. So the congregations and the communities are the really where the structure and a lot of the power of the UUA lies. And power, I say that both in the framework of strength and also of change. And so I really am excited that so many congregations have signed up, not just because they're going to address it, but because they're doing it in community. So they're doing it, you know, all on primarily, you know, the 30th and the 7th, because that really means something. It really means something that the Association of Congregations has identified this and said, yes, this is something that we're going to come together and all try and address. Because that covenant isn't just about the promises that we make about the 7 principles. To me, it's about the promises that congregations are in relationship with each other and really holding each other accountable. So if my congregation that's over the mountain isn't involved in the white supremacy teach-in, am I going to, you know, pick up the phone and say, hey, you know, I noticed you weren't on the list and I'm just wondering, you know, what that's all about. And we're in covenant with one another to, you know, uphold these principles, and can we just talk about it? And is there, you know, a way that we can support each other in doing this? So I think that associational piece of it is really important. I'm so glad you brought it up.
Yeah, and I want to add, Christina, that, you know, about that accountability and about that community, you know, we're at the point where somewhere around a fifth, maybe a little less, maybe a little more. I know that there's 1,100-ish congregations. I'm sure someone knows the exact number, but, you know, we're at the point where 1 in 5 UU congregations or communities are doing this. And how cool is that, you know, I know that if I have a, you know, as we call UU adjacent, you should go. You know, how powerful is that I can say, you know, wherever you are, there's probably a church within an hour drive that's doing this, and maybe multiple depending on where you are. And speaking of community, I know that there's a question about emotional safety for children of color during these teach-ins. And so to me, that's a really important question, because, you know, it's what we don't want to get lost is that while our churches are predominantly white, they are not all white, and especially our children and youth programs. And so, you know, for me, sometimes there's 2 quick things, and then please jump in. One is to analyze our covenantal agreements, because sometimes I see ways that covenants, even amongst children's covenants, can protect privilege, protect whiteness, protect maleness, protect folks who are able-bodied. That there's a lot of protection for those who feel uncomfortable or defensive. And then the other thing, so I can think of, for example, assume best intentions. So if somebody can fall back on a covenant of, well, I didn't mean anything by that, well, then that may be protecting someone who gets defensive. And then the other thing I'll just add quickly on ways to help children of color, or really anyone of color during this time, is to provide space, but to not demand. And Christina talked about this really well on the video that she put out yesterday, but to make space for, if folks want to jump in and talk, you know, of course, if you are, you know, an Asian American 14-year-old and you're just so fired up to jump in these conversations, great. And if you're not, then there shouldn't be an obligation. So to me, those are a couple ways that seem really important, because I don't want the fact that there's going to be folks of color in these spaces to get lost.
There's also power in validating the experience of what maybe hasn't been named until now so explicitly. So one of the things actually I just did with 4th and 5th graders last week was we talked about identity, and there was maybe 3 children, well, 4th graders of color out of maybe 8, right? So what we did was we had the kids self-identify, and then I talked about Marley Diaz. She's the Black girl from New Jersey who said, I'm kind of sick about reading only about white boys and dogs. So she started the 1,000 Black Girls collection of books, and so we saw a video clip of her, and we talked about that, and then said, when do you see yourself represented? And so that was a discussion that named what's out there, named who's represented, and then named that there is a lack of representation. So I think there's value and I trust our colleagues to know that there's age appropriate ways to talk about this. So that's one way to say, hey, this is an experience that you're having that's valid, and it is problematic and challenging. And so naming it, I think there's power in that.
We've got a lot of viewers today, and Terri is letting us know the things that our viewers are typing in. And one of the things that our viewers brought up is the question of, and I'll just quote this, how to address the insidious tendency, even among well-meaning folk, for the other, and that's in quotes, to be teachers all the time. And I know that in yesterday's communication to those of us who've signed up for the teach-in, you addressed this a little bit, but I'd love for you to unpack that a little bit. How I know that people, some people's first reactions are going to be, well, I should get the people of color in my congregation to lead this teach-in, and I know that you've addressed that in some of the things you've put out, but I wonder, Christina or Kenny, if you could speak a little bit more to that.
Sure. So on my Facebook page, which is open, it's a public post, I did talk a little bit about this particular white supremacy teach-in is not the time to ask people of color to lead. And certainly if they volunteer, which I think was what Kenny was touching on, that's a different thing. I myself am a religious educator, so I identify as somebody who finds this important to talk about and to lead, and to, in my calling, feel like it's important that I participate in that, and I have centered my ministry around that. And that's fine, that's my choice. But that's as a religious professional. In my home congregation, if I were to be asked every time to lead that discussion, that would become very burdensome very quickly. So I think being in relationship, like, just the same way we talk about being in relationship to outside organizations, making sure that we already have the relational basis in place to talk with folks and say, where, that's why I said ask, ask what they're wanting to do, listen to actually what they say when you ask, and then support whatever it is that they're saying is meaningful to them, to us. Because I think those are the ways in which we can honor the different ways that people want to engage with us. And I think there are different ways that folks want to engage.
Yeah, one of the things.
I'll just Hank, I'll just hop in and real quick and say that a lot of folks who came to the Black Lives of UU convening in New Orleans last month, which feels like 10 weeks ago in some ways, a simpler time, right? It was amazing, as a lot of them, their white ministers or staff members directly asked them, hey, I saw on Facebook that there's this thing, I'm connected with Lena Gardner, and you know, I hear about it, you know, do you want to go, or do you want me to look into this a little more? And sometimes direct conversation, just to build on Christina's point, you know, privately, right before your April 30th or May 7th or whatever day you're doing the worship, teaching, all this, to say like, hey, this thing's going to happen. How can I support you? You know, do you want to be involved in any way? Do you want to, you know, take a trip to North Dakota or, you know, or Florida just to get out of the state? Like, what do you need? So I think that this is where relationships matter. And that for folks on staff who are listening, or just active lay leaders, you know, privately checking in with people is a really like undervalued tactic. And that's how most people got to the convening in New Orleans. They said, yeah, my white, you know, DRE said this is a thing. So just don't forget the power of relationship here.
Yeah, I think that's so true, and it's actually in some ways much better than what I was going to say, which was just speaking to the white folks that it's not the people of color's job to do this for us, you know, and it's not their job, you know, and don't make assumptions about that they will want to lead this, you know. It's you know, my first year of seminary at Meadville, there was this sort of unspoken expectation on the people of color who were also seminarians that their job was to help us deal with our crap, and it wasn't fair to them. It wasn't fair to, you know, to us to have those expectations, and certainly for them to have to, you know, go to school and like deal with a variety of people's different experiences and stuff. So yeah, this is just a good reminder. So, but I think certainly, well, you know, it once again goes back to our culture of niceness, the sort of waspy thing that we have about not wanting to cause too many waves, you know, and let's, you know, and in some ways it's you know, one of the other things that we often do, we white people do in this waspy culture of Unitarian Universalism, even if folks aren't necessarily WASPs themselves, that is the culture, is that we expect the people of color to do this work for us. We expect people of color to be the ones who are going to complain and move us forward, and that's also not fair, you know. And I wish that this had happened in a different way, you know. But you know, but that's just the way it is. This is the work that is before us. So that's it.
Oh, go on, Kenny.
Yeah. So Hank, I love you bringing that up, because there's so often this question of allyship, and when am I talking over a person of color, or when am I amplifying, or, you know, and it's really tricky. And I think for me, I don't want, if you know, whether the word is ally or accomplice, and you can get into, and there's a question about terminology, but you know, for me, it's folks who are willing to act, and that act may be saying something in public when they notice something is off. It may be immediately checking in private, you know, but it's about that sort of like, you know, you start to feel in your body something is off. And so, you know, proactively do something, right? That to, in some way, it can be publicly, privately, to notice the thing and to point at when something happens. And I think similarly here, that's what I talk, you know, when I talk about like how to check in with your folks of color in a congregation, to be proactive. And that just seems like, you know, such the way to go. And coupled with that, we have to be willing to make mistakes, right? If as a man who's striving to be feminist, if I'm not willing to mess up, then I'm probably not going to do it very well. And sometimes you'll get, you know, called back in. But when I see people, you know, when I see white folks willing to act, willing to say the hard thing, then, you know, then that's when I'm like, okay, this person's really grappling with this here.
I also, Kenny, want to hold up something that was in some of the communications I got this week, which is that part of white supremacy culture is also that we pay the white folks to be professionals, and that we're perfectly happy to have people of color be volunteer leaders in our movement. And we need to examine where that's coming from, right? So if we're willing to pay folks to be guest preachers, that's a whole, or guest leaders of this for their professional expertise and time, that's a whole very different thing than expecting people to volunteer to teach us. And I just wanted to name that dynamic too. On the chat, Kristen Harper notes that the white supremacy culture is not just niceness, but also of avoidance. And so taking this on, answering this call to have this teach-in is maybe a step towards not avoiding the fact that this is what we're steeped in. And Heather Ryan Starr writes that part of what Heather has heard is that there's been an intentional decentering of the preacher in calling this a teach-in, that we're disrupting the normal ways, and normal should always be in quotes, right? That we come together in worship, that we want to do something different and get out of that box, and that other voices and not just the minister's voice need to be involved in this.
And one suggestion I would make about that is, one of the things we found helpful at Eastshore, especially after starting Beloved Conversations, is we've asked the white folks who got to a point where, let's say, on Monday they were offended by the words white supremacy, but by Friday, and I'm being, metaphorical here, they're like, oh, okay, yes, I could say the words white supremacy, and this paradigm does exist in my liberal faith. So having those folks speak from their experience is super important. So I appreciate Heather's point, because having different voices say, here's my story, here's how I how I became woke, I guess, or what happened that made you stop and think. And the other thing I want to lift up real quick is the question about updating the list of congregations. It is a great problem to have. We were hoping for 150. So the fact that we're at 240 is outstanding, and it will be updated as fast as humanly possible, because we are a small group doing this. So maybe Kenny can speak more to that. And I also want to ask Kenny to speak about the 8th principle, which will also be listed as a resource for folks. Will be invited to talk about for the teach-in as well. So, or Kenny or Christina, if you want to talk about updating the website, that would be great.
I actually have the back end of the website open on my browser this morning. Right before I logged in here, I was working on the resource page. So I will be only too thrilled to throw on there the most updated list, because we're really, really excited about that. And yeah, so, again, when you're taking a look at these resources, as much as possible, we invite folks to be, make sure that they're centering, their congregations and themselves as to this work. Maybe on these 2 days, that we're not talking about how to go out and fix everything else in the outside world, that we're really wanting to center how is white supremacy affecting our congregations and our associations. We know it's really easy for us when we're talking about racial justice to start, immediately going to answering all the racial justice issues that we see outside. So just keep that in mind when you're looking at those resource pages.
Yeah, and I'm happy to talk a bit about the 8th principle. So this is something that comes from Paula Cole-Jones and Bruce Pollock Johnson. And Paula Cole-Jones was at the Black Lives convening, and she's a beloved elder in the Black UU community and in the UU community more broadly, I would say, as well. And to me, this is really important. So this is, for folks who are maybe the most plugged into the UU, Facebook machine or monster, whatever it is, this probably came across your feed. But just for those, that this is years in the making, and I just want to read the proposed 8th principle. It reads, "We, the member congregations of the Unitarian Universalist Association, covenant to affirm and promote journeying towards spiritual wholeness by working to build a diverse, multicultural..."
Did Kenny just freeze? Okay, I will read.
I think he froze in the middle of the 8th principle there. So.
Okay, so I have it up. I'll read it. "We, the member congregations of the Unitarian Universalist Association, covenant to affirm and promote journeying towards spiritual wholeness by working to build a diverse, multicultural, beloved community by our actions that accountability, dismantle racism and other oppressions in ourselves and in our institutions." So, journeying towards spiritual wholeness by working to build a diverse, multicultural, beloved community by our actions that accountably dismantle racism and other oppressions in ourselves and other institutions. I think Kenny's still frozen.
And is this a proposal that actually will be on the GA agenda this year?
No, it is not.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, it is not.
So we did want to, the board is trying to clarify, and we'll probably just make note of this at our Board of Trustees meeting tonight, that this is not on the agenda for this General Assembly. In order to get onto the agenda for doing anything with their principles, there's a certain set course process. And the principles and sources are going to be addressed at General Assembly this June, but that has to do with the first principle project and adding and changing the sources. So, it's good to start talking about this for the next one. And certainly, I would say, I always invite people to suggest different ways of doing things that are outside of what we say can, if they would like to see this happen.
And there's nothing to say individual congregations can't adopt this. I mean, we have congregational polity. Yay. Kenny, you're back. We hear you.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know where I got cut off. I got into...
I read it. I read it again twice.
Okay, great. Yeah, well, so I wanted to point folks to a line in there in the Black Lives VUU statement that I think is really essential. And the collective of which I'm a part, so I love being on that team because I didn't really work on this much at all. And then other statements I'm heavily involved in. But it reads, this line that I really want to point people toward in the statement says, "We are not satisfied by paradigms of reconciliation without accountability." And so we are not satisfied by paradigms of reconciliation without accountability. So and then it goes on, "We will not be satisfied by practices that call for community without full and explicit recognition of the need for equity and justice." So this is a tiny bit jargony, but I think it's really, really essential. And that a lot of times when we talk about, you'll hear phrases like conversations on race, or dialogues around race, or, let's move toward a place of reconciliation. And the problem as I see it, and as a lot of folks that we work with see, that paradigm is really incomplete, because it suggests that well, everybody's messed up and we all just need to come back to the table, and if we all apologize a little bit, it'll be all good, right? And to me, this, not to me, but to us, this seems like a really understandable but ultimately unfortunate and very incomplete way of viewing race in this country. And that's why we thought it was really clear, like, let's name this the white supremacy teach-in, because it's not about, black people have messed up and brown people have messed up and white people have messed up and we've all messed up. So let's just, it's about like, there needs to be accountability to the way these systems of we'll call it unintentional, mostly white supremacy operate, and we need to be clear about what those systems are. So I just wanted to point people toward that line in the statement.
Thank you, Kenny. Excellent. And one of the things I want, there's a Black minister who said, as a minister of color, I risk losing the trust of my congregation. I have no DRE to do this work, but I'm committed. So here's my suggestion. That's a concrete suggestion to the UUMA. Have woke white ministers who are maybe either retired or maybe not preaching that weekend offer their services for free to be there of support. And maybe the minister of color doesn't have to carry this and put themselves at risk. I work as part of a ministerial team, and I've been vocal, so I feel very supported even with some of the discomfort in my congregation. But if you're alone and feeling at risk, my suggestion is, you know, I think this is a time for allies and white ministers to step in and offer their help and support and services to their colleagues of color who are feeling vulnerable, because that is real. Because the other paradigm in all of this is folks' livelihood, right? Their service, yes, and folks are needing to pay their mortgage and rent or and to survive. So this is a real risk. So I wanted to name that and that's my suggestion. It just, you know, popped into my head as I was reading that. I don't know if others have other suggestions, but this is an opportunity for the woke white ministers out there. And I know there are many, because they're showing up on my Facebook page and have been emailing and calling support to all of us. So that's my suggestion. What do you think, Kenny and Christina, about that?
I think that's a great idea, and I would just expand it out to, you know, if you have a woke DRE in a neighboring congregation that can come over and do that. If you have someone from the UUMN, the Musicians Network, that can take that on for you. There are, you know, lay people in ARE, Allies for Racial Equity, that could come in and do that for you. So I completely get the risk factor of speaking this truth, and it is not for everyone. And we do not want folks putting themselves out there in ways that are not supported. When I released my blog post, my letter about what was going on in hiring practices at the UUA, I knew ahead of time that I had the support of my congregation, my staff team at the place that I work, my family, religious professionals of color. So yes, you know, I put in many ways my future career at risk, but I knew that at least going into it, that I had lots of support lined up. So that's really important.
Yeah, and I think one thing that's related, not exactly connected, but related, is that I've been thinking about a lot, is, you know, to make sure that we're engaging with a range of sources and materials. And so in my work as the UU World senior editor, you know, we've done a lot of reporting over the years, you know, that really dives into the ways that people are grappling with this, and a couple of the sort of, you know, stories that I think may highlight this best will probably go on the resources page for the teach-in. But, you know, it occurs to me, I'm thinking about the story that I worked on with my colleague Elaine in Tulsa, and what we did was we included a range of, you know, the work that is happening in Tulsa and in Oklahoma, work to combat white supremacy as it lives inside and outside of our organizations. And there's a range of voices of color in that story. And it reminds me, first of all, I think, you know, folks, you know, it's a good story, and UU World has done a lot of good reporting on this. But I think, as importantly, it reminds me that to not just interact with the voices of color that make us feel safest. You know, we see this sometimes in the way that people interact with the Black Lives of UU team. You know, that, you know, Royce, James, and I are the sort of seen as the sort of like jolly, you know, easier to interact with folks for some people. And I think there's certainly some really unfortunate gender politics at work here, that the Black women in the group are seen as more intense, you know, and sometimes words less polite than that. But to really not shy away from that discomfort, that if you are really serious about doing this work and grappling with voices, you know, you can bring, when you're doing these worships in Children's Chapel, you know, you can bring in voices who aren't in the room. You can read readings and all sorts of things. So I just wanted to remind folks, when there's something from a person of color that makes you feel uncomfortable, that may just consider it an invitation to dive into that instead of avoiding it and finding something safer. So.
So I know that there are lots of folks on the show now, watching the show now, and people who are planning on watching it later, who are either committed already to doing this teach-in or planning on making that commitment, and still wondering what the resources are that will be forthcoming. I know a lot of people are struggling. A lot of my colleagues and friends with just what the support is going to be for doing this, and hoping that you all can talk about that, because I know it's forthcoming, and I know you're working on it, and I know it's a short timeline, and there's a great group of people working on this. So can you tell us some more?
Yeah, so I'll hop in first and do my best to be brief. So what I've been tasked with is to prep worship guide, right? So we're using the phrase teach in, and you know, and yet I think the fact that huge part of what we do as a faith. And so I'm working on the worship guide for this. And to me, what that means is a few things. So, you know, I've been working with Erica Hewitt for Worship Web to get so that people have, you know, a plethora of things to access around ways to address this in terms of readings. And then you're gonna get a pretty detailed like guide and advice and how to craft sermons and, you know, ritual and things like that. So that's the worship side. And then there's also folks who are working on resources, and I'll turn it over to Christina and Aisha for some commentary on that.
Yeah, so I think it's important to note that we're curating what's already out there. So I do want to invite folks, until this is officially up, which it will be very soon, you know, feel free to use Google, and I don't mean to be trite, but, you know, use teachingtolerance.org. And the other, I wish I could make things mandatory in UU land. I know we can't, but please read Letter from a Birmingham Jail by Dr. Martin Luther King. I asked Terri Burnor to put it in the link to it from the Atlantic article, because he's speaking to white liberals. He's like, hey, you're killing me here. I mean, I know it's a lot longer than that, but that's almost required reading. So we're curating I know Kenny and Eric are working on original material also, but what I'm doing is curating, hey, go here. So feel free to do that as well. And someone brought up, before we forget, and Christina, I will shut up and turn it over to you, woke. So we're using the term woke to mean those that are doing this work this is how I'm using it, in a non-defensive manner, and understanding the overall paradigm of white supremacy. And when folks of color are talking, I will call someone woke when they listen and aren't defensive and ask questions and are curious. Christina.
And I'll add to that. So when I'm talking about somebody woke, everything that Aisha just said, and people who are willing to risk. You know, so folks who are willing to risk doing the wrong thing and just being totally okay with that and being called out on it, and then just they keep going, right? We're all going to stick our foot in our mouth at some point in doing this work, and just being resilient enough to say, woo, you know what, I really messed up on that. Thank you for calling me back in. I'm not defensive about it. Let's just move on. That is so important in this work. Yes, you can do the white supremacy teach-in other than the 30th and 7th, absolutely. And you can sign up, even if you're not doing it on those 2 dates, go for it. We tried to select 2 dates that we could get as the time that the majority of folks would be working on this. Resources, so we have some, at the top of the resource page, we just have some, what is the teach-in, what is white supremacy, really some basic things that you need to be able to answer for your congregations. And then for adults, we will have something to watch or discuss, an activity and a follow-up, and kind of the same pattern again for youth and children, something to discuss or watch, an activity, and then follow-up. And then a whole host of resources that you can use if you choose not to do those very few things that we've called out as, if you can only do 1 or 2 things, here's where we think you should be at. Here's a whole host of other resources that we've curated if you'd like to do something else. Does that help?
Yes, and I like, Hank, you made a good point that woke does not mean racial enlightenment. Thank you for that, because it's true. It's more coming from a place of non-defensive curiosity.
And Kenny just reminded me to give a shout out to the webinar. So we're having a webinar a week from today at 8 p.m. Eastern. So that's April 13th. And then another one on the 27th, again at 8 p.m. Eastern. We will be sending, if you signed up and had your email address in that sign up, we'll send that out, as well as, of course, it'll be on the website. And those webinars are just to talk through some of the resources, take some questions, and just basically make sure that everybody's kind of on the same page, or near to the same page, as close as we can be in UU land.
Yeah, so just because I see we've got a few minutes left, I do want to go back. There was a question earlier about some of the dangers of navigating issues of patriarchy and classism along with white supremacy, and I think obviously you could spend a whole view just on the sort of intersectional nature of these things, but I can say that for me as a male identified person, to be sure that I don't quote focus on race at the expense of other other privileges that I have or other identities that I have. And so this is a great opportunity to sort of be aware of how these things live simultaneously. I think the danger in that, of course, that I want to caution folks is that it's very easy to slide and just like focus on gender, focus on class at the exclusion of race. And so, there's a lot of resources out there about how these things live simultaneously. So please do take this as an invitation to explore these combined issues, just not at the expense of talking about white supremacy.
Wow, we have 5 minutes left. So are there any burning thoughts that anyone has that hasn't been discussed? Although we could do this, I know, for another 3 hours, but in 5 minutes, or 4 minutes.
Well, yeah, I can start. So for me, I guess a closing thought that I have is that as Unitarian Universalists, and I'm a lifelong UU, for me, one of the most essential things we can do, and I'm not, is that I think sometimes we have a tendency to point our fingers at Boston, to point our fingers at the minister, or the DRE of like, fix us, help us, save us, and to sort of, for all of us, to claim our own power. And I mean all of us. to claim our own power and agency, I'm really inspired by people lay people, just folks who are regular old members who said to their ministers, like, yo, this is happening, we need to do this. And so this is just a reminder that, those of us who are leading this, that we see your power and we invite you to live into it. And that a lot of times I think white people who kind of start to do this work think of themselves as powerless. I don't want to offend people of color. I don't want to, and to me, this is quite the opposite. That some of the most powerful, some of the most powerful allyship or accomplishment I've seen are people who are not quiet at all, but they use their voice in a particular way. And just a 20-second way of explaining that is by saying, we're actually working with 8 or 9 other people, and some of them are on this call, or on the VUU listening in right now. We're working with 8 or 9 other white folks, as well as Leslie Mack from the Blue Collective, and they're lending their power. And here we are at the center, the 3 of us at the center of this, but they are behind the scenes in their own ways. They are not being quiet at all. They're just using their voice in less of a public way. So I want to give a shout out to those folks, and then I'm going to shut up.
I'm so glad you said that, Kenny, because I was just about to say the same thing, that this is the way this collaborative effort has occurred, is a paradigm shift, like not having one specific person who is responsible for moving it forward. There's a chat of about 9 different people, and different people are taking different tasks at different times, and somebody can come in and say, you know what, I cannot do that, somebody else will pick it up. And that is really, really important as we examine structures of power and dominance within the UUA and within our congregations, to really understand that we can still be super, super effective without resorting to the structures that we typically see in our white dominant culture. So I'm really glad that you brought that in.
And just a nod to my religious educator colleagues, this whole movement, revolution, name it what you will, was started by religious educators. And yes, ministers have been, and musicians. I mean, I do have to give a shout out to Jason Shelton, who wrote a note decolonizing our music library. Thank you. So yes, it is collaboration at its finest, and it is awe-inspiring and awesome. So Kenny and Hank, Michael and Hank, do you want to jump in there in our last 30 seconds? Anything?
No. What else can I say? This is fantastic. It's getting us to talk about difficult things. As much as we like to talk about all our diversity of ideas and stuff, we don't actually give each other opportunities to talk. And so this is an opportunity, and I really hope we use it well.
Yeah, many thanks, and a shout out to Terri Burnor, who's popped up from behind the chalice, who has been trying her best to read everything that's been put in the chat. We've had a lot of viewers today and a very active chat, apparently, that your hosts don't see directly. So apologies that we did not get to everyone's great questions and comments. Usually we can get to all of you who are here live with us, and today we can't. So I think that's a real testament to how excited people are to do something that is not our usual way of doing things, and that to me feels good.
Amen. And I second the thank you to Terri. You've been typing up furiously, huh? How's it been?
I have. I've been tweeting as much as I can, and we'll keep posting things out there. So if you've got thoughts, all of you, we had like over 120 viewers, which is the most that I think I've ever seen on the VUU. So huge shout out to all of you who are participating. Please add your voice to the conversation. I captured what I could, but would love to hear you as well. So put it out there and share all the power that's part of this UU White Supremacy Teach-In. It's going to be an amazing event, and I am just thrilled to see everybody contributing. I also want to add, if I could, just a plug for next week. So as a reminder, the VUU is broadcast every single Thursday. So we are at 11 a.m. Eastern, and next week we're going to be meeting with Bart Frost and Hannah Eller-Isaacs, and we're going to be talking about some new developments in the Coming of Age program. Aisha, you're going to be on the show too.
I will, yeah, and I'm really excited about the new book that just came out, the journal. So I want to so deeply, from the bottom of my heart, thank Kenny Wiley and Christina Rivera. Thank you so much. This is exciting. It's exciting and inspiring. So thank you so very much, and thank you, Michael. Thank you, Hank, and thank you to all our viewers. Have a wonderful week, everyone. Thank you.